My motto is we do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, right? And as long as we can apply that to the decisions we make, I think we're going in the right direction. And we're also trying to look out for the best interest of the 120 some thousand people who live in Missoula County.
Welcome back to another Tuesday on the Missoula podcast. Brandon, good to see you as always.
Good to be here. I'm really excited for this episode.
Me too.
It's a new one. It's unique. It's different.
Jeremiah Petersen, Sheriff. Jeremiah Petersen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Cool. Jeremiah, what's the biggest misconception from the public on the life of somebody in law enforcement?
Well, I think that, the big thing is that each person that's in law enforcement, they're a regular mom, dad, husband, wife, daughter, son, just like everyone else. We just happen to have a unique job that, gives us some different perspective on what goes on, in society. Are we any different? No, we're not. Our pants go on one leg at a time. We just have something that we've been tasked with doing, and that's, keeping people in line with rules of society. And so therefore, sometimes there's a negative light cast on law enforcement in general. But essentially we are the peacekeepers.
When in your life did you decide law enforcement was the dream or where you wanted to go?
Yeah, that's a good question. It sounds really cheesy, but when I was in high school, I used to like the show Cops, and I watched it quite a lot.
Watch Cops.
Yeah, great show.
Yeah,
So good.
And I think the thing that was appealing to me was the variety.
Yeah.
That constant change, the adrenaline, that's what appealed. But then I think the other thing that, not just with me, but I think with most everyone that gets into law enforcement, you want to give back, and, you want to provide service. And so that to me is, kind of when it started. I went to the University of Montana. I got a degree in sociology with an emphasis in justice studies. They didn't have a specific criminology degree at the time. And, I just thought that, I want to get into law enforcement. And initially I was thinking something federal. I don't know why, but I wanted to be a U.S. Marshal. And then once I kind of found out what they did, I knew an SRO, school resource officer, and he said, "Hey, you should come out and ride at the sheriff's office." And I did that. And I'm not going to lie, the first time I rode, I thought it was super boring.
Sure.
And the second time I rode, though, there were a lot of things that went on. And, just this department, it's the only one I've worked at. And so I can only speak to the experience here. But, it's big enough to provide a variety of different opportunities, but yet it's not so big that you're just a number. And so, I do think that our folks are really well-versed on what they can do. And it's been an outstanding career.
How many years?
I just completed my 23rd.
23 here.
Yep.
All with Missoula County.
Yep.
I'd imagine over the last 23 years, just as population growth and infrastructure, Missoula, you have seen an increase to those calls. You probably don't have a lot of those boring nights like you used to.
Absolutely. It is a little bit crazy that, we can always count on, usually like New Year's is fairly busy, and the 4th of July and stuff like that. But we're busy a lot. Missoula County is 2,600 square miles. And I'm not sure what the latest population was. I think about 122,000 people. Around 75,000 of those are within the city proper. And so everything outside of that is what the sheriff's office covers. And, for years we covered that with 4 deputies. And so you're by yourself a lot of windshield time. And, we cover a great distance driving. And so, we have moments that, it's call to call, and there are times when it's a little bit slower, but I think the biggest thing that's increased over the years is the violent nature of the crimes. Essentially our jail has become a felony jail, and it holds, 400 people, and it's full almost all the time. And so, it's just unfortunate that that's the direction we've gone. But, with Interstate 90 running right through Missoula, there's a lot of bad things that go by on the interstate.
I want to go back to when you were younger. You grew up here in Missoula.
I did. I grew up in Frenchtown, graduated from Frenchtown High School, Go Bronx.
Go Bronx. Were you one of those kids that liked order and followed the rules and wanted everything to be nice and tight? So, yeah, and maybe that lended to.
Yeah, I did. I mean, obviously I did plenty of stupid things, and you don't realize it as much until, I'm a parent now and you see your kids and you want them to not do those things. But yeah, definitely. It's never been super hard for me to follow the rules. And, of course, my mindset now is, you make a choice, there's a consequence. Yeah. And so if you want to speed and the consequence is getting a speeding ticket, then okay, as long as you're not endangering anyone else.
Can we go back to that no speed limit on the interstate?
That was,
I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I was not in law enforcement when that was in effect, but I know it created a lot of issues for law enforcement as far as, their parameters, writing people tickets and, what was reasonable and prudent. And, that was a mess.
What did your folks do?
So I grew up on a dairy farm, and we had dairy cows until I think I was 10, and then those got sold. And that's what my dad did. And then he went back to school and got recertified he had gotten his degree many years prior, got recertified and then taught at Frenchtown. And then my mom worked at the paper mill in Frenchtown for 38 years. So, I had a great childhood, didn't necessarily have a lot of things, but a lot of great memories.
Was going to work at the mill ever on the table for you in the plan?
I thought about it because at the time, it was a really a good paying job.
Yeah.
And they had a program when I was in college, and it was a summer student program, and I did it for 4 years there. So I got to experience it, and it was great. I got to learn a lot. I got to learn how to weld and do some things like that. But that's when I learned that, I probably did not want to go there, every day for the next, 40 plus years. And when I was there were guys that had been there 40 plus years.
Man, that was the backbone of that community. I mean, it was
100%.
Generational workers.
And, it allowed, the school district, they were very, very well off because of that mill. And, that was a huge blow when it closed down for sure.
What was your folks' reaction when you told them you wanted to go into law enforcement? Was that encouraged? Or?
Yeah, it actually was. My mom was always the one that, like when I was a kid, even growing up on a farm, I always wanted a dirt bike, and my mom wouldn't let me have one because she thought they were too dangerous. And ironically, I had a 3-wheeler, which is probably the most dangerous ATV that there has ever been made. Yeah. And I just don't think she put that together, but bless her heart.
3 wheels does sound safer than 2.
Right. So
I get it.
She was, I do think she was a little apprehensive, but I never heard any negativity around it. And of course, my dad was super supportive. My folks were outstanding as far as just supporting not only myself, but my sisters growing up. I was lucky enough to play sports, and I honestly don't remember a time when my parents weren't there. It was just the norm, and it didn't matter where we went. We played in the playoffs in Plentywood, Montana, and they were there. And we played in Glasgow, and they were there. They were outstanding. And so I feel very fortunate to have had that support, and they've been that way, through this career. I know there's been plenty of times where I've talked to them about some things that have gone on and not the most pleasant, but they're very supportive.
So you graduated from Frenchtown, go to the University of Montana. Remind me, and what'd you major in?
It was sociology.
Sociology.
Yep.
And you graduated there. And what was that first job, first position? I mean, what was next?
Yeah. So while I was going to school, I had worked for a gravel company, Mickelson Rock Products, and I drove dump truck and operated a little heavy machinery. And I did that for 2 years while I was going to school to help pay for school. And then when I graduated, I worked for them for a year. Before this, I was able to get the job that I currently have. And honestly, when I applied, I didn't think I would get hired because I didn't have any experience. And I knew that, there were a lot of folks interested in it. And so I felt really fortunate I got hired in January of 2002. Went to the Law Enforcement Academy in April and graduated in June. And then, completed my field training, and that started things off.
Crazy.
What was the most challenging thing for you as you got started, or maybe something that was surprising about the job?
Yeah, no, the hardest thing for me initially was not believing everyone. And I distinctly remember the very first call I went on with my field training officer, and it was a domestic issue, and standing there listening to one side of the story, and I was like, "Wow, that all sounds reasonable." Well, and then we went and listened to the other side of the story, and I remember thinking, "Well, that sounds reasonable too." And then it dawned on me that somebody's not telling us the truth, and I think that was probably the biggest hurdle initially for me, was that somebody would actually lie to the cops. I just felt like, why would you not be telling the truth? So that was certainly something I had no experience with, and I didn't expect it.
Do they give you any training on how to spot misconception?
Yeah,
or,
we
or
certainly,
deception, I should say.
you do, you have interview schools and whatnot that you can go to. And I think the biggest thing though is just the time and the number of people that you talk to.
You need the reps.
Yeah. And, I think that most cops have a BS meter, and they, usually know when it's pegged. But, I've talked to enough people over the years that I usually have a pretty good idea who's being truthful and who's not. Just, by body language and the way they're acting. But some people are good at it, and I'm sure that I've been lied to, and I've probably believed them.
Excluding your current role as sheriff of Missoula County, at what point in your career were you most fulfilled, happiest, absolutely loved your position, what you were doing the day to day?
Yeah, I think, in law enforcement, you kind of go through these hills and valleys of, it's the greatest job in the world, to this is the worst thing ever, and I want to quit tomorrow. And, they say it like 3 years is kind of when you start to get that first, ooh, is this really the right career for me? And then you get a little better at 5, and then bad again at 7. And I think I experienced all those things. But I will say initially, I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I couldn't believe that they paid me to do it. Literally, you get to shoot guns, and you get to drive fast, and, lots of awesome training.
I feel like a high speed chase would be a blast.
A
ton of fun.
It's and it's funny perspective.
If you're the chaser.
Right. And it's funny perspective, because initially I thought that they were great too, when I was just a deputy. And then as soon as I became a street supervisor, and, you start thinking about the liability and all the bad things that could go wrong, you definitely have a different take on it. And then, of course, my current role, everything's a liability thing with me now, and that's what I'm concerned about. So yeah, it definitely changed. But I would say
so
early
you had the
on,
most fun as a deputy.
Oh, 100%.
You just, yeah.
100%. I mean, and we joke about it. So our patrol teams, we have 4 patrol teams, and they're comprised of deputies. Each one has a corporal and then a sergeant. The sergeant's in charge of that team. When he's not there, then the corporal's in charge. And we joke that the corporal is the best spot within the department. And it's probably true, because they're only on the hook half the time, because the sergeant's on the hook all the time. They're still, one of the crew. The sergeant sometimes can get excluded from that. So, those were the good times. It loses its luster the higher up you go.
Looking back over the last 23 years, how many times were you genuinely scared? Like, this is not going to go well?
Lots.
Really?
Yeah. No, lots. And I think that's human nature.
Yeah.
I just my own opinion. If somebody says they're not, I think they're lying. But when you're doing a search in a building that's dark, and you're slicing the pie as you're going around that corner, you don't know what's there. And, that just because the call comes in a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that that's really what happened, or that's how it's going to play out. And, obviously in Montana, guns are very prevalent. So we always assume everyone has them. And you just never know.
Is that something like internally, are you just naturally brave all the time, or is it a switch you have to flip on, or it's part of the job? Like, I have to go when everything's telling me not to go here.
Yeah.
What?
Well, I mean, I think that we all have that, they call it that sixth sense or spidey sense or whatever you want to call it. And, I don't have hair now. I used to, but there's plenty of times where you may not necessarily want to do it, but you know you need to do it. Like that's
Yeah.
what I signed up for. Do I consider myself overly brave? No, I don't. I think I'm confident. You know, that I always tell my kids, be confident, not cocky. I'm confident in my abilities. Does that mean something bad could happen? Absolutely.
Oh.
You know, I'm not invincible, but you know, I'm there to do a job. Right. And that's how I've tried to approach everything, you know, whatever the role was, we're there to do a job. And sometimes they're unpleasant and sometimes they're scary. But you know, we have to make that scene safe, right, before we can proceed. And that was one of the things when I was a field training officer that when I was on field training, one of my FTOs told me that you can handle any call as long as you do it safely. And that just really stuck. And I tried to incorporate that with my trainees. And that's that same thing. You know, if we're going to do a search this building, if we're looking for someone, let's do it as safe as we can. Now, something bad could still happen. But with me, you know, I always try and say, be prepared, not paranoid. And, you know, that mentality, does it definitely change how I do things on a day-to-day? 100%. And I think I could probably safely say that for anyone that's been in law enforcement. You know, when we sit at a restaurant with our family, I don't ever sit with my back to the door, right? I mean, that's just human. That's my nature. Like, do I scan the crowd? 100%. Am I trying to read people? 100%. You know, do I tend to see the worst in a lot of situations? Yeah, I do. But I think part of that comes from not only my training, but my experience. A lot of what we do is dealing with negativity. And so it's hard to not always assume.
You have to assume the worst in every situation.
100%. And, you know, obviously myself and everyone else that's in it, I'm only a cop when I'm there, right? Well, the rest of the time, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, you know, I want to be just a citizen, but you can't flip that switch. And I think that is something.
You've seen too much.
100%.
How does that affect your family, like your wife and kids, like
Sure.
knowing that you're always on? And
yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely in the back of their mind. And I think that, you know, my wife and I've had that conversation. You know, obviously it gives her anxiety, you know, if I get called out in the middle of the night, you know, but she knows that that's part of the job. And, you know, one of the other things that, going back to what I used to tell trainees, was the most important thing we do every day is we go home, right? We go home to our families. And so that's always been my mentality and my goal when I leave the house, that, you know, I'm going to go home. And unfortunately, you know, there's hundreds of law enforcement officers every year that don't. But that's just, you know, been my mentality that, you know, I'm going to win. I'm going to win.
Let's take a break for some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
And then we'll come back to your story. You ready?
You bet.
All right. This is kind of a weird question because you're a Frenchtown guy, but what is your first initial memory of Missoula?
Grizzly football, Dorn Blazer Field.
Special.
Yeah, no. And I just remember going to those games with my dad and how cold it was. You know, they were the old school stadium seats that the wind would blow up underneath you. And Marty Morningwig, quarterback in the mid 80s. Yeah, my parents had season tickets, football and basketball. And I remember going to those with my dad. I thought it was the greatest thing ever.
What's your favorite coffee shop?
That's a split. Floco for the sugar-free chai and Copper Mountain for their Lotus.
Favorite restaurant?
That's kind of a split too. I call it Guy Steakhouse, Lolo Creek Steakhouse. I like the atmosphere. Food's always good. And then I like Fiesta and Jalisco.
Solid choices.
What zip code do you live in?
59803.
What do you love the most about Missoula?
I think I like the diversity, and it just doesn't really matter. You know, on the one end, you might have your rednecks, and then the other, you've got some pretty good culture.
What's the weirdest thing about Missoula?
There's a lot. Slant streets. You can surf in downtown. They'll have a 5K and then a brew fest.
It's true.
I like that part though.
Is there a particular book you've read that has made a significant impact on your life?
Yeah, Into the Wild, John Krakauer, about Christopher McCandless that went and lived in a bus where unfortunately he lost his life in Alaska. And I think to me, it showed he had a goal or a dream, or I'm not exactly sure what he had, but, he left this well-to-do family, but he didn't have a plan, and he wasn't prepared on how he was going to get to that goal or to execute it. And I think to me, that's like great to have these dreams and goals, but you got to have a pathway or a plan on how to get there. And he didn't have that.
It's a case study on what not to do.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about your plan. So obviously you continue to get elevated in your career. What specifically about you or during that process helped you to continue to get promoted to where you are now?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I honestly tried to do as much as I could to be as diversified as I could within the sheriff's office. And, that started as being a field training officer. I started that. I was fortunate pretty early on. And I just felt like that made me be the best deputy that I could be, because I had to impart that knowledge on a new person, and I had to make sure that they were prepared to be in that car by themselves. And so, with that, I tried to be a good team player, tried to be always willing, to work and to give back. And, am I saying I'm the best person for the job? No, I'm not. Do I have a wide array of experience? Yeah, I do. And I've tried to take a little bit from each one of those roles. I was an FTO, I was a corporal, I was a sergeant, I was a captain, and incorporate that into, where I'm at now. And then the other thing too, I worked for 4 sheriffs, and, seeing some leadership styles that I really liked and seeing some that I maybe didn't, and then incorporate a little bit of my own personality into that. And, I think that's where I am right now. And, you learn. I mean, you learn from doing things the right way, and you also learn from doing things the wrong way. But I think being humble enough to admit that maybe that wasn't the right way to do it. And, when I was elected sheriff, one of the things I said all along was that I felt like our department was going in a really good direction. I think Sheriff McDermott did an outstanding job, and, that my goal was to just keep that ship pointed in that direction. We have outstanding individuals that work for us, and, to empower them and give them the tools they need to be successful.
Why 23 years ago, why did you go Missoula County rather than Missoula City? How did you make that?
Yeah,
decision?
I did a ride along with a city police officer. He was a brother of a guy that I went to high school with, and so I had known him since I was a little kid. And ironically, his advice was be a fireman. But no, honestly, the opportunity came up first at the sheriff's office, and that's why I put in for it. Yep. And had it been the other way around, I'm sure I would have applied.
So when in the 23 years did you decide someday I want to be the boss? I want to be the sheriff.
Well, I will say that probably in year 2 or 3 is when I thought it would be a really good idea. And then probably at about year 18 or 19, I wasn't so sure that was the direction I wanted to go, just because I saw, what the sheriff did and the weight that's on the sheriff's shoulders. And so, as the higher up you go, the lonelier it gets. And, I don't know at that point that I thought it was the greatest thing or the greatest idea to be the sheriff. I mean, obviously my mind changed, and, I'm proud of the sheriff's office and the people we have. I mean, I really feel like we are in the top in the Northwest, as far as not only our people, our training, the skills that our folks have, and I would rank them right up there.
I want to dive into that a little bit, because your career in essence, you've climbed the corporate ladder. You came in as a FTO, climbed all different steps. You checked all the boxes. You did your job, filled out your paperwork, got the approval, moved on to the next job, moved up. And then all of a sudden, one day you decide to run for sheriff, and all that hard work that got you to the top, it changes because you now become a politician. You're campaigning, you're shaking hands, you're kissing babies. What was that transition like? And now being in a role where you're an elected official rather than just in your role because of hard work and checking those boxes.
Right. Yeah, no. And it was definitely an adjustment. And I said it when I started, and I'll say it again. I'm not a politician, and I don't want to be a politician. I realize it's a political position that I have. And I am honored that, I was elected to be the sheriff here in Missoula County. But it's so different from what I started as, as a deputy, and, the day-to-day stuff. I mean, I have stuff that I do, I have a calendar, and sometimes I miss things. So I have that, but then, people stopping by.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody wants to talk to the boss, and everybody wants to talk to the sheriff. And, there's a lot of people around here that know me, so they're all my friend. And there's a lot of people that don't know me, but they still know my name, so they're my friend. And then, that making sure.
Well, I'd imagine there's a demographic that you're not their friend.
Oh, 100%. And that's one of the things that, I've had to learn, is that not everyone's going to like me, and that's okay. But, my motto is we do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. Right. And as long as we can apply that to the decisions we make, I think we're going in the right direction. And so, what myself and my undersheriff are doing, I view it as a dual leadership role. What we are doing is we are trying to look out for the best interest of the 200 plus employees that work at the sheriff's office. And we're also trying to look out for the best interest of the 120 some thousand people who live in Missoula County, right? We're just simply trying to make sure that folks are following the rules. And, I think just human nature, sometimes we don't like rules, right? But we know that we have to have them to have, a civilized, organized society that's not just full of chaos. And I think that's what our goal has tried to, is, and we're trying to instill that in our people. I've talked to a lot of different folks about, like, what's your mission statement and for the department? And honestly, my mission statement, as crazy as it sounds, do you remember Mick O'Lean, that voiced the Grizz? Yep. He would say, be your best because your best is needed. And I had some of those made up, and they're around our office and they're at the jail. And that's what I expect. We provide a service to the public. That has been my thought from the time I got into it. And we want to provide the best service we can. I mean, it's owed and expected from me. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to provide that service.
Which I think is a great reminder. I recently had a conversation with my kids. We were driving, and there was a sheriff had somebody pulled over. And as we drove by, my son made some sarcastic comment, just like drug bust or something.
Yeah.
And it was a great opportunity to just talk to my kids about that perception of how wrong it can be, because your guys' primary job is to create peace. You could have been there helping with a flat tire, could have been mom with a child that was saying, like, you have no idea. Why does the general public have that misconception that anytime there's an altercation, a communication with law enforcement, it must be negative, something wrong is going on?
Yeah. Well, I think that the one thing to keep in mind, and I've always tried to keep this perspective, I mean, obviously we do proactive things, but a lot of what we do is reactionary. It's somebody is having something bad happen in their life to the point where they need outside intervention. Therefore, they call 911. And usually they're at their worst, right? For whatever reason. Right. And so when the law enforcement shows up, people tend to just have this, in my opinion, this negative image of them, because they're taking somebody to jail for whatever reason, when the reality is the cops didn't choose to go there, right? They were sent there. It was decisions and choices that those people made that caused the cops to have to go. And unfortunately, that tends to be that mindset of folks. Like you said, they always assume the worst. I will tell you, one of the frustrating things is, when you're on patrol, we eat out a lot, which is not healthy, but it's just kind of the nature. And you walk into a restaurant and there's little kids, and people say, you be good or I'm going to have them arrest you. And that's the absolute last thing I want in that little kid's mind.
Right.
I want that little kid to think, if I see that person in a uniform and something bad is happening, that's who I'm going to go to. That's who is going to help me, is protect me, save me. But unfortunately, like you said, there's this
Well, you feel it.
emotion.
I'm driving down Reserve Street and the officer's behind me. All of a sudden, the tension of like, am I properly using my blinker? Did I come to a complete stop?
Right.
The fear comes in.
And I'm no different. I mean, when one gets behind me, I'm the same way. You
Right.
perk up a little bit. That's normal. That's what, that's a normal.
It's probably a healthy fear.
100%.
It's a good thing.
100%. And that's one of the things that, we talked about when on traffic stops with, trainees. If somebody's hands are shaking when they're handing you their ID, that's okay. Like, it's okay. That's, like you said, that's a healthy fear. It's when they're calm and cool and collected that you might think, have they done this before?
So,
What's going through their mind? So,
Jeremiah, as you've matured maybe in your leadership, has there been any specific, authors or influences that have helped you become a better leader? Somebody that you look up to that's helped you a lot? Or is this just, the nature of the job is you become pretty good at leadership?
well, and again, I'm not saying that I'm the best, or that I'm even good at it. I mean, some people might disagree, and I will admit I'm not super well versed. I don't read a lot. I have my downtime at night that I watch a lot of YouTube. I watch a lot of sports, and I watch the Cowboy Channel, and that's my time, in the evenings. Is there anything specific? No, I've just tried to, look at the people that I have worked for and the things that they have done that I have liked and that I've thought have been successful, and then tried to, get the input. That's where I go back to like that dual leadership role with myself and the undersheriff. We've tried to implement the same thing with the captains and lieutenants, the corporals and the sergeants, their teams. And, I don't make a lot of decisions without seeking input from other people, because again, I'm trying to, that lens is a really wide lens, and I'm trying to look out for everyone and do the best thing. Because, when I've talked about it with my administrative staff, when you start off as a deputy, your lens is pretty narrow. And then you become a FTO, a field training officer, and it gets a little wider. And then you become a corporal, and then a sergeant, and then a lieutenant, and then a captain. And now I just have this massive lens. So is there anything specific? No, not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I've just tried to incorporate all those things, that I have liked and that have, that I think have worked. And the other thing too is, I'm not afraid to change some things and do things differently. One of the things that I hear a lot are the two things that cops complain about, and that is change and things staying the same. And I hear that. And so, it's okay to change if it's for, in a positive direction.
Right.
And a lot of things, why do we do that? Well, because that's the way we've always done it. And maybe that's not the right way to do it.
Forgive me, remind me, what year did you become sheriff? When did you get
Well,
elected?
I was elected in November of 22. So
22. What was that day like? Election day?
well, I mean, I
Did you have
was
one of those big election parties, and
we did have, no, we did not have a big election party. I mean, I ran unopposed. I was really fortunate. So there wasn't a ton of stress there. But no, it was an exciting day. I think, I don't know that honestly everything had sunk in, the role that I was taking on. Cause I mean, I had a pretty good idea of what the sheriff did, and Sheriff McDermott was really, he was great that last year he was in office. He let me come to a lot of things and kind of see what was going on, but there is so much, on the daily, that, like I said, 200 plus employees, $34 million budget. I think we're the second largest sheriff's office in the state of Montana as far as employees go. And so, that there's just a lot of cogs in the wheel, if you will.
how long do you want to do this?
That's, I've still got I've still got a little gas in the tank.
Good.
So, I'm 48 years old. So, I still think I got a few years left, and I want to do it as long as I'm providing, or as long as I feel like we're moving forward.
Yeah.
And, we've got some good ideas and the department's in a good spot. And I think if I get to a point where that's not the case, then, it'll be time for somebody else to step in.
If you had a crystal ball and looked ahead, what's life look like for you on the other side of law enforcement?
Yeah. And that's a really good question. I will tell you that for years I thought in the back of my mind, so I own a few cows and I have a semi. I like to play cowboy. I'm not necessarily a cowboy, but I like to play it. And
Ever since Yellowstone came to town.
yeah, no,
I
I
think I'm a cowboy.
I will say that was prior to John Dutton. So I just thought I would retire and, raise a few cows and maybe do a little trucking and who knows, maybe that still will happen someday. But that's more of just, something that I like to do on the side. And that's my getaway from, when I have to wear the sheriff hat. But I don't know. We just had a guy retire a couple of weeks ago and I think, it was funny because I was his primary FTO. So, he had less time on than me. And I'm like, why are you retiring first? But, he even said that, he was a little nervous because he's so used to how things have been for the last 20 years. And I think it will be really nice to not have, the worries. But I also think it's a little scary because, it's that I know it.
To change, your life is so structured. You've been told
Right.
what to do, how to do it since day one. And so to just get up and not have a clue what to do is gotta feel overwhelming.
And it's funny because I still, I guess it's a career, even though it's been 23 years, but it doesn't seem like now that I've been doing it that long. I mean, I'm sure there were plenty of nights. I worked patrol for 15 years straight, so I worked nights and days. We rotate every 2 months, and I did that for 15 years, and that was fun. You asked earlier about what was really fun. I liked patrol because I liked the variety. Every day you go to work, there's a blank slate, and you never know when they call your badge number on the radio what it's going to be.
I don't know if I've ever seen it, but could you go from sheriff back to patrol?
I don't believe so.
No.
I think that I don't think my position would still be held. Oh. I don't think so. I think you could as the undersheriff, but I guess I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't go back to shift work. I'm too old at this point. It just my sleep. That would be too hard of a transition for me.
I just have a couple more questions for you, but specifically, is there some common characteristics of really effective law enforcement officers that they have in common? Mm-hmm. So that's question number one. And number two would be, if you're talking to young people that may be leaning towards wanting a career in law enforcement, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, well, I think
become a firefighter.
Yeah, yeah, because everyone loves a firefighter. I mean, that's the truth.
It's true.
Like everyone loves them. So I think that probably the big thing, some attributes, obviously, a good communicator is really good, level-headed, common sense. Sometimes it's not always so common, but yeah. But I think the biggest thing is that someone's integrity, and that's something that we can't train you. We can train you how to talk to people, but we can't train you, to do the right thing. The right thing at the right time for the right reason. And so that's probably the biggest thing. We can train you how to shoot, how to drive, things like that. And then advice, boy, that's a big one. I mean, I think that it's a huge benefit if you have some type of, post-secondary education. Do you have to? No, you don't. But, one thing that cops do a lot of, and a lot of people don't realize, is we sit in front of a computer. We type a lot. All those calls have to be documented. And so the better you are, at typing, at formulating a good sentence, a paragraph, those reports, the quicker you get done, the quicker you're back on the street helping your buddies out. So I think that even though my degree specifically, wasn't, exactly law enforcement, I think all of those things help me, because we have some people come in and, they come from the trades, which are awesome, but they don't necessarily, do a lot of typing. And so they start off hunting and pecking and, they usually figure it out pretty quick. But those are things I think that helped. And that's what I would, I would recommend. There's a lot of different careers in law enforcement, a lot of directions you can go, as far as, probation, the jail is a great one. You can do a lot of stuff federally. There's a lot of different avenues, the highway patrol, city PD. I mean, obviously I'm biased towards the sheriff's office because that's where I've worked, but all of them have good attributes and they all have different things, to add. And some people, like doing crash investigation, for example, and the highway patrol is a perfect spot for that.
It seems like it's kind of died out, at least from my perspective, but what was your response? How'd you handle the abolish the police, defund the police, like that whole movement.
Yeah. I mean, again, from my perspective, that's just silliness to say that. Could we use more training? Always. We're dealing with people. It's people dealing with people. Do cops make mistakes at times? Absolutely. We do. But I think it's important to constantly be up to speed on, the latest and greatest. As far as abolishing the law enforcement, I mean, our society would be in utter chaos. And I think that some examples of that, happened throughout the country, where bad people take over. And what ends up happening is good people get harmed, because the bad people are in charge, and we can't let that happen. We have to be the sheepdog, right? Protecting the flocks. I mean, that's a simple analogy. I didn't come up with it, but it's true. That's what we're doing. We're keeping the wolves away.
Yeah. Nothing? You good?
I'm
no
good.
more questions? I got one last question for you.
Sure.
It's become one of my favorite questions here. There's a billboard. You have an opportunity to give one quick message to 120,000 residents of Missoula County. Other than slow down, what are you saying to them?
That's a kind of a tough one. I would say do the right thing when no one's looking.
Integrity,
Yeah.
character, those things you can't.
Yeah, 100%. And that, I mean, if we all had that mentality, and again, I understand we're all human.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. Just own your mistake and move on. And most of the time, it's a learning experience.
Oh.
But a lot of people, again, going back to that, make a choice, consequence. They don't want the consequence from that choice. So
good. Sheriff Jeremiah Petersen, thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate you and all the work
Absolutely.
you're doing here in our county.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You as well.
What's up, Missoula? This is Nick Balla, producer of the Missoula Podcast. We truly appreciate you hanging out with us as we dive into the stories that make our city special. If you could do us a quick favor and follow the show wherever you are listening, whether that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, maybe you're watching on YouTube, so hit that little subscribe button. It really helps us out. Head on over to www.themissoulapodcast.com for more information, and we'll see you next week.